Welcome to Beyond the Blood, Episode 9. Before we begin this episode, I want to acknowledge the reviews I have received on iTunes, positive or negative. Most of the negative reviews follow the same theme. Watch my cadence. I'll try to be more aware of how fast I speak. I want you, the listener, to absorb the information. If you've left a negative comment in the past, I invite you to give the podcast a second listen. No podcast can be a match for all listeners. I just hope I can provide a quality podcast for many.
Tonight, there's a new man on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He's former U.S. State Department employee William Bradford Bishop, and he's been on the run for 38 years after the brutal murder of his entire family. Investigators in Maryland believe he used a sledgehammer to kill his wife, mother, and his 3 young kids in 1976. Then they say he set their bodies on fire in a shallow grave in North Carolina. The FBI thinks Bishop could still be living in plain sight under a different name.
The FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitive program is the single most effective law enforcement tool for catching big bad fugitives. We've caught over 400 fugitives since it's existed, and a couple have actually been caught here in Hawaii. So I'm not counting out the idea that someone here may have information about this particular fugitive.
The FBI created this new sculpture of what Bishop might look like today. They believe he may have a new family. If you have information that could finally solve this case, call 1-800-CALL-FBI to report it.
The state's
Gilchrist County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I just shot my daughter and shot all my grandkids, and I'll be sitting on my step, and then when you get here, I'm going to shoot myself. You will find a homicide at 43 South Pershing in Nancy Park.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not?
All crimes have a motive. Go beyond the blood and discover the reasoning behind the darkest crimes in history.
March 2nd, 1976, Columbia, North Carolina. A state forest ranger received an urgent dispatch to investigate an active brush fire in a remote wooded area. When the smoke cleared, the ranger observed the hallmarks of an arsonist: an empty gas can and a shovel marked OCHHDW. Shockingly, the ranger would discover a scene of murder: a 3-foot shallow grave containing 5 partly charred human remains, 3 young boys and 2 women. This is how one of the longest criminal mysteries in United States history began. To understand the motive for the murder, we must explore the background of those involved. William Bradford Bishop Jr. was born on August 1st, 1936, and grew up in Pasadena, California. He demonstrated an aptitude for knowledge. He would earn a Bachelor's of Science degree from Yale University and go on to earn a Master's of Arts from Middlebury College, a top private liberal arts school. Bishop seemed to have a promising future, as he would go on to marry Annette Wells, his high school sweetheart, after graduating from Yale. The couple went on to have 3 sons: William Bradford Bishop III, Brenton Bishop, and Jeffrey Bishop. Bishop had a unique skill set in that he was fluent in English, Spanish, French, and many more languages. This high skill set led him to serve 4 years with the U.S. Army, focusing on counterintelligence. No one doubted Bishop's intelligence. This is what led him to a career with the U.S. State Department after leaving the Army. As a U.S. Foreign Service officer, Bishop had exotic postings around the world, locations many of us would envy. In Italy, he served stints in Verona, Milan, and continued his education in Florence. He was able to complete postgraduate work at the University of Florence. Exotic assignments would flow in for Bishop outside of Italy. Ethiopia and Botswana exposed the family to lands and cultures many can only dream of. In 1974, William's final post seemed much more humdrum than exploring those faraway lands. He was stationed in Washington, D.C., at the State Department headquarters. Bishop served as an assistant chief in the Division of Special Activities and Commercial Treaties. With the new assignment came a suburban life, a house in Bethesda, Maryland. Annette was now 37 years old. His sons William III was 14, Brenton was 10, and Jeffrey was 5. His mother, Lobella, age 68, also joined the family in the residence. No matter how successful an individual appears, personal disorder can be found when sought. Bishop despite all his success, suffered from depression and insomnia. These symptoms impacted Bishop to the point that he was under psychiatric care. Bishop was prescribed medication for these symptoms, medicine typically provided to treat depression or alcohol dependency. The side effects can include the typical dizziness, drowsiness, headaches, and memory impairment. Working his new assignment in DC, a desk job, William struggled to adjust. William had become adjusted to riding motorcycles to work and had even obtained his pilot's license while stationed in Africa, something his suburban life could not compete with. Bishop was able to gain extensive camping experience while posted in Botswana and Ethiopia. He always was an avid outdoorsman. Now he sat behind his desk and felt the pressure of his colleagues to be promoted. Not only personal pressure to succeed how he did in higher learning, William felt pressure to provide from his wife and his mother. To compete and excel was perhaps the only thing Bishop was focused on in March of 1976. In the early years of 1976, he was anticipating a promotion within the State Department. Bishop would have likely shared the anticipation with his family. How can anyone be more qualified than he? Numerous postings around the world, Yale educated, fluent in many languages. On March 1st, 1976, Bishop would learn he had been passed over for the promotion he believed he deserved and had come in his way. For most, not being promoted can be disappointing, but certainly not life-altering. For Bishop, a man who had succeeded or even excelled at life, this was nothing less than humiliation. He certainly could not find an explanation to provide himself, and the thought of telling his family the disappointing news must have weighed on him. It would set off a chain reaction and an FBI manhunt. After realizing his career was stalled, Bishop would inform his secretary that he needed to leave the office, that he was not feeling well. Authorities managed to piece together his movements after he left work. Bishop stayed in the area of Foggy Bottom, the same neighborhood where his office was located. He drove to his bank and withdrew several $100s from his bank account and went to a local hardware store. At the hardware store, he purchased a shovel, pitchfork, gas can, and a sledgehammer. By the time William returned home, it was near 8 p.m., and the children had been put to bed. Investigators theorize Bishop entered the home and first murdered his wife. She was found beside a book that she may have been reading at the time of her murder. Next, Bishop targeted his 3 boys. One by one, Bishop would continue his attack until the children were lifeless. Lastly, Bishop would turn on his mother, who would return home after walking the family golden retriever. All of Bishop's family members were killed using blunt force and showed no defensive marks. William moved all 5 remains into the family station wagon. Perhaps in an effort to give him more time to flee, Bishop drove 275 miles, or 443 kilometers, to a rural community of Columbia, North Carolina. Crossing jurisdictions is a common method criminals use to hamper an investigation. Driving across multiple states can significantly delay an investigation from reporting to identifying the victims. I would have to ask if Bishop understood this. In the densely wooded area off North Carolina Highway 94 on March 2nd, 1976, one day after the murders and a 6-hour drive, William dug a shallow grave and piled the battered bodies of family members side by side. Using the gas can he bought at the hardware store, he doused the family in gasoline and set them ablaze. One detective described the journey with 5 bodies in the back of his station wagon as one morbid ride. With the discovery of the remains by the forest ranger after the blaze, detectives would not immediately be able to identify the bodies. It would take authorities a week to positively identify the family, as no one initially reported them missing. Their home in Bethesda would eventually be searched after a neighbor called police after not seeing the Bishop family in some time. Inside the home, police discovered a brutal crime scene. Blood was found splattered throughout the foyer, indications of a struggle inside almost all of the rooms, a clear sign of a terrible event. Inside the bedrooms, authorities could only imagine the terrible anguish that had taken place. One of the most terrible pieces of evidence inside the residence were the marks on the ceiling of a bedroom where 2 of the boys slept in bunk beds. The mark was that of a sledgehammer swinging and hitting the ceiling of the bedroom. Authorities managed to track Bishop's movements prior to the murder. After complaining of feeling ill and leaving his place of employment abruptly, William drove to the local hardware store. Using the words OCH HDW printed on the discarded shovel, detectives in North Carolina checked every hardware store imaginable in the area. With no luck, authorities cast a much larger net to try to find the store that supplied the shovel. After contacting Washington, D.C. law enforcement, North Carolina investigators followed information from D.C. police to a local hardware store called Pooch. Authorities posted flyers inside the store of the missing family. Only around this time was the family reported missing, allowing investigators to finally link the murdered individuals to the Bishop family. Using dental records, the identification was confirmed. After disposing of the bodies, local and federal law enforcement theorized Bishop drove the station wagon 400 miles west to the Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. The car was not found for 16 days following the discovery of the family's remains. Police bloodhounds would find only a faint scent of Bishop around the park's tourist center. Inside the family's vehicle, detectives found dog biscuits, a bloody blanket, a shotgun, and the spare tire well inside the vehicle contained significant amounts of blood. Was Bishop crossing more state lines to confuse authorities? Murdering in one state, disposing of the bodies in another, and dumping the vehicle in Tennessee. The last confirmed sighting of Bishop occurred on March 2nd, shortly after he discarded the bodies in the shallow grave. Jacksonville, North Carolina, a sporting goods store. William was spotted by John Wheatley, who still runs the store. Wheatley recalls Bishop was purchasing a pair of tennis shoes on his credit card. An unidentified woman was holding Leo on a leash, the family dog. They seemed very much like a couple, said Wheatley. He went on to say that Bishop was very polite and well-spoken. This unknown female was described as wearing a beautiful dress and appeared to be Caribbean in nature, explaining her dark skin tone. By finding the unknown woman who accompanied Bishop, the police would take massive leaps into the actual motive for the murder and possibly the location of the elusive Bishop. On March 19, 1976, a grand jury brought forward an indictment against William Bradford Bishop. The indictment contained 5 counts of first-degree murder and other charges. Evidence against him included his sudden disappearance, the sighting of him in the area of the discovery of the bodies, and the bloody stains inside the residence that included his fingerprints. Bishop's trail went cold after his vehicle was discovered in the Great Smoky Mountains. His career at the State Department not only took him around the world and allowed him to flex his knowledge in languages, one of his duties included making passports. Bishop has been spotted all over the world, predominantly in Europe. When Bishop fled from his crime, air travel was vastly different. Given his lead over law enforcement from the time of the murders until the indictment, Bishop, in theory, could have flown out of the country on his diplomatic passport. He vanished just like the infamous D.B. Cooper, the hijacker who made off with $200,000, never to be seen again. Like D.B. Cooper, Bishop has been immortalized in verse. In the 1970s, Virginia-based bluegrass band Coup de Grace wrote The Ballad of Bradford Bishop. The murders took many of the family friends by surprise. Alvina Long, who carpooled with the Bishops and played tennis with William's wife at a local tennis and swimming club, almost walked in on the crime scene a day after the murders. I just drove over to pick up the kids and take them over to Rockville Municipal Swimming Pool, recalls Long, now 77 years old and living in a different area of Bethesda, Maryland. Long went on to say, there was no one home, but the back door was open. I opened it a little bit more. Saw a pot on the stove with a little oatmeal like normal. I didn't notice anything special. Slid the sliding door closed and went back home. I thought they'd gone skiing. What happened to Bishop? Did he vanish? With 1 week head start, Bishop could have gone deep into the area he was last spotted, the Great Smoky Mountains. Bishop was an avid outdoorsman who gained tremendous camping experience while stationed in Africa. Eric Rudolph, an individual who outlasted a Federal Bureau of Investigation manhunt, outlasted authorities and remained in hiding in the Appalachian backwoods. The most likely scenario is that Bishop fled the country to Europe. The 1970s left very little documentation when an individual traveled. Additionally, Bishop was fluent in many languages, and he held a diplomatic passport. Diplomatic passports can allow for an ease of visa travel. He could have taken advantage of this loophole. Furthermore, the sightings of Bishop continued as far as Italy. Those sightings have further credibility, as those who spotted William knew him before the murder. In July of 1978, a Swedish woman reportedly spotted Bishop in Stockholm, Sweden on 2 occasions in a public park. She had previous dealings with him while on a business trip in Ethiopia. In January of 1979, a former colleague of Bishop at the State Department had a confrontation with a man he was certain was William in a public restroom in Toronto, Italy. The two made eye-to-eye contact, and the colleague asked the man if he was William Bradford Bishop. The man, startled with an American accent, cried out he was not Bishop and fled. The bearded man fled down the alleys of Toronto. The last credible sighting of Bishop occurred on September 19th, 1994. Basel, Switzerland. On a train platform, a neighbor of Bishop's was enjoying her vacation in Europe. She observed a well-groomed man in a car. She was no more than a few feet away. She had no doubt this was her former neighbor and the wanted fugitive, William Bradford Bishop. Although the last credible sighting of Bishop was in 1994, there is no reason to doubt that Bishop is alive. The possibility that Bishop is still alive and in hiding in Europe is why the Federal Bureau of Investigation added Bishop to their 10 most wanted list in April of 2014. In conjunction with adding Bishop to their 10 most wanted list, the FBI commissioned an age progression sculpture. The talented and well-known Karen T. Taylor, who pioneered two-dimensional facial reconstruction, completed the sculpture. Taylor's bust showed Bishop at age 77. With the addition of William to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, it is clear that the Bureau still believes Bishop is alive. Investigators with the agency point to possible locations of his whereabouts in Switzerland or Italy, but could possibly be anywhere within the borders of Europe. With Bishop's knowledge of passports and identification cards through the State Department, it is conceivable that Bishop forged a passport or travel documents leading up to the murder. Some within law enforcement believe Bishop could be in California. This theory does not pan out for most, as no credible signs of Bishop place him in California. Since William fled justice, his likely occupations would be within criminal organizations or the education field. On October 9th, 2014, the FBI exhumed the body of a John Doe who died in 1981 in Scottsboro, Alabama. The DNA taken from the exhumed corpse did not match that of Bishop.
An unidentified man who was buried in Jackson County, Alabama, was exhumed this morning by the FBI. The feds trying to determine if the body in that grave is William Bishop, a man on the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives list. Bishop was last seen in 1976. He's accused of killing his family nearly 33 years ago. Agent Paul Damon says the tip came in following a TV show.
CNN's program The Hunt with John Walsh aired a top 10 fugitive, Mr. Bishop, and asked the public for any assistance that they had recognizing him. Mr. Collins, who worked at the Scottsboro Funeral Home, recognized John Doe and also recognized Mr. Bishop, the top 10 fugitive, as looking very similar.
Well, the unidentified man died after he was hit by a car in Scottsboro. He was buried when authorities could not identify him.
The FBI created a profile of Bishop that may help amateur sleuths or law enforcement authorities narrow down suspects. It is well known William was an avid outdoorsman who enjoyed hiking and camping. He obtained a pilot's license while stationed in Africa. He enjoyed riding motorcycles and worked out on a regular basis. At 39 years old, Bradford was 6'1", 189 pounds, and had an athletic build. Bishop has a love for dogs, which explains why the only survivor of that terrible night was the family dog. His taste includes spicy food, scotch, and peanuts. His distinct physical attributes include a 6-inch vertical scar on his lower back from a surgery, and his distinct cleft chin. Bishop's possessions when he fled may have included his Yale-class ring and his father's Smith & Wesson .38 special revolver. At the home, the only passport missing was that of Bishop's, adding to the theory he planned to flee overseas. Without Bishop in custody, the actual motive for the crime remains unknown. We can apply possible theories as to what moved this incredibly successful man to murder his entire family. Murder can be motivated by several factors, to include revenge, money or drugs, domestic arguments, otherwise known as crimes of passion. In Bradford's case, and as a law enforcement officer, his motive might be that of humiliation and domination. After losing his offer at a promotion, Bishop was humiliated. His wife and mother, according to reports, demanded success and ridiculed failure. Bradford was not satisfied with his position in Washington, D.C. He desired to return to a world of travel. His wife was against the idea of returning to the field. The humiliation of losing out on the promotion and the factor that he was losing control over his own place in the world may have drove him to snap. Another possible motive in this case is a theory known as altruism. Altruism, from a law enforcement point of view, is more common among family members. The belief that by inflicting short-term pain on a family member, that one is sparing them from a lifetime of misery. William's motive for the murder may continue to be unknown. Theories around Bishop have sprung up. One theory is that high-level law enforcement officials are protecting Bishop, not wanting to see this murderer brought to justice. I do not give much credit to this theory. Those who put forth the idea that Bishop is being aided by the U.S. government have yet to provide any real reason as to why Bishop is being protected. With the addition of Bishop to the FBI's most wanted list, this theory takes a serious downgrade in my opinion. Another theory is a bit more complex. James Bruno, a best-selling author, puts forward the last theory as such. Bishop was trained by the Army as a Serbo-Croatian linguist. Two aspects of his Army intelligence work have come to light. A, he monitored Yugoslav broadcasts for possible intelligence value. And B, at one point, his superiors tasked him with infiltrating a Yugoslav ski team visiting Italy to try to recruit its members to become spies for the U.S. As for the radio monitoring gig, such work hardly spurs target countries to take revenge. Such official eavesdropping is done by most nations of any consequence. It is kind of passive spying. The ski team ploy deserves more respect. Sort of a real-life spy versus spy spoof ripped straight out of Mad Magazine. The simple explanation, and one the majority of us would agree with, is that Bradford was a sick man. A man who lacked the very basic human trait of empathy. No excuse for this act, and one day, many people hope that Bishop is brought before a judge to face justice. Today, Bradford, 80 years old, justice is long overdue in this case. Beyond the Blood can be found on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play. With the conclusion of this episode, I'd like to remind you, Beyond the Blood can be found on Facebook under Beyond the Blood. Follow Beyond the Blood on Twitter at Beyond Blood PC. Take a moment to review and subscribe to the show on iTunes. Reviews help the show expand and find new listeners. Remember, every crime has a motive.